Hello, I'm Tony Vlahos for Execunet. Thanks as always for tuning in. It's way early in the new year, and that means it's prime time to start your executive level job search. Now, here's a big heads up. Your search might look a little different this year. My guest today can shed some light on what you can expect and how to get an interview for the role you want. He is Joel Koblentz, founding partner rather of the Koblentz Group, a firm long recognized for successfully recruiting senior leaders for public companies, investor-controlled enterprises, and family businesses globally. Joel, it is good to be talking to you.
My pleasure, Tony.
So let's get right into it, Joel. What is the state of executive hiring in 2021?
Well, as you know, in 2020, there were times in the year where we were working at two speeds, stop and dead stop. And what companies were going through in 20 is being reflected in what they're looking for in 2021. So what we saw in 2020, in the most simplest of terms, was a speed acceleration. Change was already afoot. We all knew it. We were all feeling it. And what happened with the COVID is it accelerated change. Okay, we've all seen it with the distance learning and the way we're communicating with each other through mediums like this one. And it's also changed the way companies began to think about how they were going to compete going forward. Transformations have been going on since the beginning of man, okay? What this did was increase the speed of transformation. The risk of transformation has become a lot less because the cost of staying still is much greater than the risk of moving and adjusting. And the third thing that we saw within all that is that there's now not only the acceleration, but the torque, meaning it has to take hold. And there's a constant friction between what was and what needs to be. So organizations right now are struggling with this movement between what the future, how they will shape the future and get out in front of it, and what they've had in the past. What doesn't work now, and I would say this to any audience that's looking to make changes from their side and to candidates who might be looking perhaps to make a change, the swim lanes don't work. Okay, what the old where the skeletons are buried doesn't work. The not invented here no longer works. Why should we do it? We've never done it like that. Doesn't work. So what companies are looking for as we go into 2021 are individuals who understand that there's no longer a career track. What there is a series of projects. It might be in that company because they cannot see far enough into the future to plan out what an individual's career track might look like, whether it's operational or functional, okay? Things change. We're starting to see at the very top, where I do a lot of my work at the CEO and board level, change outs at a speed that we haven't seen before. Lots of reasons for it. We can go into those if you'd like, but the point is that we are beginning to see change at the executive level that's beginning to reflect the transformation that these companies are going through. So for the companies in 20 and 21, what they're really looking for coming out of 20 and into this year and going forward are individuals who can solve three high priorities, okay? And every company's priorities will be different. It's no longer just enough to manage process. It's about leveraging to solutions. And if something doesn't work, be quick enough and culturally affinitive enough to begin to move the needle in a different way. For people who are looking, you have to find an organization that it not only talks that way as if it's window dressing, but actually acts that way. And that is willing to break down the cultural barriers that are necessary to make these kinds of transformations and to allow the successful candidate to make the mark that they were hired to make, okay? So that's the biggest change that we're seeing.
Mm-hmm. It's a wise, dare I say, philosophical view of the situation. I appreciate that very much. Our executive audience is probably wondering, what do I need to do to be perceived as the person, as you put it, who can make their mark within an
Yeah.
organization? How do I shift what my mindset is? How do I change my approach, my strategy even, to be seen as the best candidate for a particular organization?
Well, let's assume that they're being considered for a role outside their company. Inside their company, that change is going on all the time. It's a melange of change. Nobody is hiring caretakers any longer, unless for any reason a company is in that kind of a mode. But there's so few of them that it doesn't really pay to talk about them. Really, if you're a candidate looking in at a company, the smartest thing you can do is read all you can read about them. Whether if it's a public company, you can get the analyst reports. You can read the public documents. You can read articles about them in social media, let alone the print. And what you're going to come up with are the 2 or 3 or no more than 4 themes that this company is dealing with. Okay. And then as you look at yourself, in which of those themes do you really believe, in whatever role they're talking to you about, that you can actually add value, that you're unique, you bring a unique perspective, you can add something to this melange that will allow them to say, this is the person we want because this person can help us drive through that initiative. And so I would focus on their needs, not yours. Okay. And by that, I mean, if you don't know, let me step aside and say, if you can't figure that out, then in conversations with them, I would say, I would clearly talk about one's background, but I'm going to tell you the one question to stay away from and how to avoid it in just a second. So let me whet your appetite on that, because I hear it again and again and again. But if you're in those conversations, you want to ask them specifically, I've studied your company, I've studied the situation, I understand the role, that, you have a position description, job description, and I've looked at that. Tell me, in your words, what are the 3 things that are going to make this person successful in this role? And will you provide the resources to make it successful? So here's the question that sophisticated interviewers never ask, but most interviewers do ask. Tell me about yourself. Okay, everybody's going to get that question, Tony. Don't answer it. Answer it in terms of themes. Don't go back to your childhood and your little league and your trophies and all the exceptional things you've done. It will go right over their head. What they want to know in asking that question, without saying it, is, tell me the 3 things that I need to know about you. What are the 3 themes in your career, the 3 accomplishments in your career, whatever it is, without going into a lot of detail? Think about that as your window dressing yourself to get them to open the door to you. It's your elevator pitch. If you can do that, then you will get them talking to you about their themes. Okay, and that's the engagement that you want. If you don't get to that engagement, you're just another candidate that they've talked to. Yeah, maybe pretty good, maybe excellent, but I don't know, maybe they don't fit, you want to engage with them about the things that are most important to them. Because ultimately, as a candidate, you're hiring the employer. There's no guarantee that the person who hires you is even going to be there in a year. Remember, we're in a world of projects, not a world of careers. So what you want to do is make sure that you're on the same wavelength with that person and their challenges and how you're going to resolve those. And if at the end, those are challenges that you feel you can resolve, you're passionate about resolving them, you have the skill, the experience, the know-how, the reach, the insight, the intuition, then that's one that you pursue. If not, I would say don't be unhappy and take the role. Too many people struggle to try and take a role. So here's the statistics. 70% of people making more than $100,000 a year, all the research shows this, are unhappy, uncomfortable, discontent, frustrated, find an adjective. Who wants to be in the 70%? I don't. I'm sure you don't, Tony, and I'm sure most of the audience doesn't want to be. So don't take a job just because it's a job. Make sure that you're really passionate and you're hitting those 3 points that are really important to success in that role, and they're the same 3 points that they have. If you have, you start off far better off than most any other candidate.
Mhm. This is wonderful advice. Joel, tell me, what are some other behaviors that you've noticed among executives in search that you wish they wouldn't do?
Well, they talk too much about themselves. Okay, that's first. They believe they have to tell their story again and again and again, and that's why I talk in terms, Tony, in terms of 3 themes. You have to stick to your brand. Okay. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't try something new in terms of a new opportunity or this or that. And we've seen people make these kind of changes. But the one thing that they have to be true to is themselves. And they have to do it in a way that is not egocentric. It can't be me, okay, or I. It's really about, their discussion should be about solutions. That's what the clients are seeking, our clients are seeking. And I'm sure that they're looking at the human capital the same way that they look at financial capital and resources and informational capital as a path to solutions. Now, we all know you can't win without people, and people are your most fundamental asset. I believe it. I think most companies do, but they don't always act that way. So, because they don't act that way, you have to be really crystal clear. Okay, you have to be really crystal clear about the value that you bring, and it has to be consistent with who you are. And consistent, therefore, as I mentioned before, with the 2 or 3 things that they're most pressing to do. Okay. Most companies, if they come back to you with a job description, it'll say you have to have these many things. Remember, a job description is a 3-humped camel. It's been put together by a number of different people who have different points of view, who all want their views into that job description, because that's what they believe the role to be. So in these interviews, you have to ferret out what's really important and figure out if that's you and your themes. If it is, then I think you can bring yourself to life in their minds, and that's the differentiator.
Absolutely. Joel, are companies making hiring decisions more swiftly? And it's the early part of the year, I understand, but are you noticing whether that's true, or is it true in certain sectors? Does it depend? What's your take on that one?
Well, I wish I had the magic bullet, Tony, but it does depend. I can tell you there's one common thing. We have to hurry up, okay? And it's because of the speed and torque I've talked about. And I'll give you a live example of one that we are working on now, and it's to find a CEO of a company where the CEO is going to retire. Okay. Well, we really need somebody by the end of March. Well, they just retained us to do the work. How can you do a comprehensive search in such a way where you're organizing a search committee that isn't in total agreement of what we're really looking for, and get them into focus and so forth? So I think in search, there's really 2 types of firms. There are the big plug and play, and I'm sure many of your listeners have dealt with them. And you get a call from a junior person who's checking some boxes, who really doesn't know the client, really has no insight into their challenges and so forth. He's never met the client. And then there's a group of us who've been doing this a long time, who believe that judgment is really the case. And what we really look for at that end, and this is why it takes a little longer, and in some cases your clients will be better served if they're working with folks at our end of the spectrum, it's because we've invested the time up front and really do know the client. Our goal, simply at the end of the day, is to have the client hire what we think is the best qualified candidate. But in that process, we want to make them think, not just plug and play. And so when you're dealing at the front end, and I know I'm off script here, but I think it's an important point. When you receive those calls from search people, and they all tell you how much they're in a hurry, understand who's on the other end of the line. If it's a very junior person, your job is basically to get to the more senior person, answer their questions, make sure you're qualified, let them check their boxes, and hopefully you'll get a call back. If it's a more senior person, you can engage and ask, significant questions. And that person, and there are firms like ours where you really know the client well enough, you're almost acting as if you're the client. So what do we tell clients? We said, look, we won't present anybody to you unless we have judged that if it was our capital at stake or our situation at stake, that we'd want to see that person. So we're very selective about who sees the client, but we're also very thoughtful about in talking to candidates so that they understand what those 3 or 4 themes are. When you're dealing with some of the bigger firms and you're dealing with the more junior people, you don't have that. And the reason I say that is it slows up the process. They have a certain gearing, okay, where we move, because we know the client, we can move much faster. Then you get into the client's hand and all of their logistics. A good search firm will have worked with the client to understand those logistics so that we can inform a candidate to say, look, this is going to take some time or it won't. Here's what you can expect next week. If it doesn't happen, then you're going to hear from me. It just doesn't go into the bowels of the ship. So with candidates, you really want to try and understand who's giving you that answer and whether that answer is really legitimate. With that, the other side of it is every client wants to move faster. Okay. Now they may be slow on their end, but they certainly put the pressure on us and the candidates to make a decision. What we saw at the end of last year is this pent up demand for executives. They did not take action. They did not have the budget for it, or they weren't sure what the role would be. They weren't sure how we were going to come out of this whole pandemic. But now they know the transformation can't wait. And so they are pressing hard to find people who are change agents, who understand cultural affinity, who understand the unsaid messages of culture and how you move that ball forward. If you make those if you as a candidate make yourself available to understand those messages and show you understand those messages, it will speed up the process to solution. They won't have to see as many candidates. But in terms of, say, is it 1 month, is it 2 months? It depends. Every client's different.
Well, that's a very full and useful answer. Thank you. Finally, Joel, many executives this time of year are thinking of what to them appear to be good career alternatives, good corporate career alternatives. They're thinking about board seats, they're thinking about independent consultancy, they're thinking about buying a business. What advice do you have for senior level people that are considering these possibilities?
It's a very simple answer, but it's an all-encompassing answer. Know yourself and know your passions. We have watched an individual who was one of the top 10 in a major New York Stock Exchange company leave to teach the 3rd grade. Okay. We have seen another individual who was one of 2 finalists and didn't even wait to go through the succession process for the CEO job of a New York Stock Exchange company leave to buy two small printing companies to print t-shirts, Tony's wedding kind of t-shirts. And they've never been happier, okay? We're starting to see this with people who are never thought in their wildest dreams they would reach the levels that they've reached in their careers, okay? They realize it's now a series of projects. So they begin to think about life as a portfolio of their time. So it doesn't mean they couldn't jump back into a full-time job, but nobody is keeping marks on the wall to say, well, if you went off and did board seats and you owned a screen printing company and you taught the 3rd grade and you did a bunch of different things, call it pieces in the pie chart, that you wouldn't get a call from somebody like ourselves to say, would you consider coming back and taking over this company for a couple, 3 years? There's much more activity in private equity, investor-controlled companies, and family enterprises than we have ever seen, more so than in the public arena. And therefore, they're not career tracking the same way that we used to see career tracking in the normal progression of careers. So for individuals who want to take the time to do something different with their lives, There's 7.5 billion people on this planet, Tony, and none of them, you may think they care, they don't. You have to care about what you're passionate about, what you know, who you are at this point in time. And we all tend to lie to ourselves. I still think of myself as 29 until I see pictures of myself. But the honest to God truth is that we all evolve as human beings. So if we evolve, what interested you then may not interest you now. And what may interest you 5 years from now, maybe not what interests you today. So I would encourage, before anybody taking any steps, to really try and understand themselves and what they're really, really passionate about. After all, they're going to spend 60 hours a week, maybe 100 hours a week, depending on the circumstances, at doing whatever they're going to be doing. And whether it's a combination of things or one employer, or starting out as an entrepreneur. And there are no failures anymore. There's just opportunities. And then the question I get when I bring this up is, gee, well, what about financially? How much risk am I really going to take? After all, I've got a family, I've got children, I've got to worry about school, I've got, expenses. I don't have an answer to that. I only have an observation. For those people who have chosen that path, within 2 years, they're generally as well off, if not better off, than they were previously. They're not subject to an employer. They're not necessarily subject to a stock price. They're not subject to a boss that may or may not stay. They're subject to themselves. They own their future. And so people begin to look at that. And there's ways that people have successfully combined this. And I can tell you, as the world turns, that is becoming much and much more acceptable. May not still be the norm, but it's approaching the norm.
Joel, I've enjoyed listening to you. You're delightful to listen to, and I've learned a lot from you. I'm sure our listening audience has as well. Thank you for your time and for sharing your insights today. And I look forward to hearing more from you in the future very soon. Thank you.
Anytime, Tony. It's been a true pleasure.
Mine as
Thank
well.
you. Thank you.